Welcome to Listen by Gene Ginsberg. This audio experience and podcast is all about social media, digital marketing, entrepreneurship, and interviews with top entrepreneurs in the digital and social space. I am your host, Gene Ginsberg, digital marketing expert, #1 best-selling author, and award-winning entrepreneur. I will be sharing with you strategies, tips, and tactics on how to grow your business and your social media following. Thanks for listening. Hey everyone, Gene Ginsberg here, and welcome to another awesome episode of Listen by Gene Ginsberg. I have a very special guest today, someone I actually have known for quite a while now. Our paths have crossed several times. How's it going, Sergey?
It's going great, Gene. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to have this conversation.
Yes, so great to have you. We actually met originally, I don't know, I guess 5 years ago or so, when I was living out in California, and Sergey's company at the time was looking for some marketing support, and that's how we ended up connecting. But it sounds like you've already had a number of exits since that company. We'll talk about that in a minute. So it's very exciting to have a new startup, which we'll also talk about that. So so I guess usually first question I always ask, just kind of give our audiences some context, is tell us about your background.
I have somewhat of an unusual, but becoming more usual background. I started as a software engineer. Actually, even prior to that, I had an electrical engineering degree, mechanical engineering, and was doing just that. And then got interested in computer science, went to UCSD, got a degree there in computer science, and still wasn't really sure what I was going to do because it was a new field at the time, and I really wasn't quite clear where exactly would I apply myself. Over time, I figured out that I have a knack for taking complex problems and breaking them down and putting together teams for getting those problems resolved. And just a typical engineering ladder: senior engineer, director, VP of this, and the CTO of that. Smaller and smaller companies, and then smaller companies to larger companies route, and then started going the other way, is picking smaller companies and then eventually my own startups. I always knew that I wanted to start a business. Wasn't really sure how exactly to do that as a software engineer. I just didn't think I had a business acumen in order for me to be able to do it. So I had a choice of doing the master's degree or doing an MBA. I ended up doing a master's degree in computer science and then eventually a PhD in business. Lo and behold, it didn't really teach me anything about starting a business. And the business school or the PhD program starts with, well, if you had $1 billion, that's what you would do. So they don't tell you exactly how do you get to $1 billion. So I learned a lot though, with running my own startups. I have quite a few. Some of them, I primarily specialize on the B2B side. So some of these startups are usually acquisitions. And so I would spend a couple of years building a startup and then driving it towards the acquisition, and then spend a couple of years at the company that acquires it. So that's my typical route.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. I can totally understand. I actually went to business school for a quarter and then I ended up dropping out. But yes, it is like they don't really teach you what happens how do you get to $1 billion? It's like a lot of times you have to start with nothing. So what happens when you do that, and how do you get to make $1 billion? So I feel like they skip a step there.
They sure do.
Yes.
They don't tell you what to do when you have just $1, right?
Yes.
So exactly where do I go from there? And
No.
the typical startup route, and it's just not what's being taught.
Yeah, they don't really discuss that. So interesting how curriculum probably needs to change in business schools, or actually in colleges probably in general, but it's not as applicable anymore to the real world. Awesome. I love the background. Thanks for sharing that. So tell us about your current company that you're working on.
So I recently joined as a late stage co-founder of a company called Sales Message. So what Sales Message does is it's a two-way communication SMS communication platform. Now, if you were to put it in terms that everybody would be familiar with, it would be very much analogous to an ESP, email service provider. So typical email service providers like MailChimp, Constant Contact, SendGrid, Bronto. So all of those smaller and larger SaaS providers for email, this would be very much analogous to that concept, only on the text messaging side. So this would be, even though their term like that doesn't exist, but it would be a text service provider. So now you could ask, well, why do you need a text service provider? Well, exactly for the same reason why you need an ASP. I can open up Gmail and start sending emails, but that does not get me. It does not get me to a business-to-business use case where I need to manage the reputation, manage my unsubscribe, schedule campaigns, and do all of those things that ESP allows for me to do. A similar dynamic exists on the text messaging side, and our targeting for the customers is very similar to what those ESPs do. They target small to medium businesses, and so do we, right? If you look at text messaging, just as you look at email, that pie is basically divided into three unequal pieces. Piece number one is marketing, the other piece is support, and yet another one is sales. Analogous structure exists for the SMS. People use SMS for the purposes of emailing, for the purposes of marketing. They use it for the purposes of support, but also for the purposes of sales. So sales message specifically focuses on the sales part of it. And it has quite a few integrations into its OEM, to use an old term, but really what it means is it's bundled into other services, CRM services like HubSpot and ActiveCampaign and Pipedrive and so on. So it's basically integrated into them. So if you have one of those CRMs, and you need a texting capability, then you would use a plugin. And you can also use sales message directly. You could just come in, sign up, and start texting.
I am actually extremely familiar with sales message. I use that for a lot. And that's actually the text messaging platform that I recommend for all of my clients. And I probably have gotten 10 clients on that platform in the last like 6 months. So bringing you business.
Right, which we absolutely appreciate.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't realize that you actually are now with sales message, because I know you were with another company before that, and then I was like, oh, I guess didn't realize that that's where you're moving towards. So that's fantastic. And then just for our audiences, I'm pretty familiar with sales message, but for our audiences, what kinds of businesses does sales message work with?
We don't specifically verticalize. So I think your question is, what kind of jobs that our customers are hiring us to do, and what is that typical job? Now, we would be a right type of solution for almost any business from a vertical perspective. Dance studios, coffee shops, pizza stores, anything. Any of the 12 million small to medium businesses in the United States could absolutely use our product. But from a vertical perspective, and the jobs that are hiring us to do is basically to maintain communication with both their sales leads and their existing customers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's become such a new way of communicating with customers or prospective customers, and I love it. It's so different than email, and just email has been around for so long and has been so overplayed, and just I honestly feel like no one checks their email anymore because it's like,
that's right, just like nobody's picking up their phone anymore.
Yeah,
right?
No one picks up. Totally agreed. But people still read their text messages and respond.
They absolutely do, and that's why we feel the efficacy of our platform is absolutely beyond what you could get via email, or you could get via phone calls, right? So that's indispensable for a small to medium business.
Yes, absolutely. So what are some of the challenges that you're experiencing in the industry now?
I would call it both a challenge and an opportunity. So it happens. So I guess 2021 it's a pretty interesting year, because it's an interesting year across many different industries. Beyond just simply being a pandemic year, it's also a year of fundamental tectonic changes that are happening across the board. So if you look at the iOS 14 changes on the Apple side and what sort of ramifications that they have for Facebook and the privacy policies and information that gets passed around, which required shifting a number of different components, and Google changing its ratings and how it looks at the website, which is coming around. And another change, which is not as well known, but it's making its way across the companies in the United States. It's the change. It's called the 10DLC change. Now, so if you look at what 10DLC means, exactly analogous to what happens on the email side. So in order for you to be able to email people and your email not end up in their spam box, there needs to be some reputation management. And this is exactly what email service providers do. So the industry, the carriers, basically the pipes where the messages are traveling, and the companies like T-Mobile and Verizon, AT&T, they got together and they said, okay, well, there's just a lot of garbage that's traveling across our pipes. So what we need to do, we need to come up with a process where businesses, real legitimate businesses, register. They pay a registration fee and they pay a monthly fee. But once they do, there's a profile and their reputation is getting managed, and the deliverability for those messages is going to improve, right? Because now people are not going to ignore it. They're going to trust where that's coming from. So 10DLC is basically the code for a local number that implies the process of registration. So no longer, even though the timeline has been shifting, sometime during the summer, they're going to start assessing both fees and penalizing people who haven't registered their brand, which is basically an indication that they're a legitimate brand now, and they can start texting. That's one of the biggest changes that's happening. Now it's lifting a floor in terms of the cost for everybody's involved in text messaging, but it's also an opportunity for legitimate businesses to improve their deliverability and improve efficacy of texting.
Great. And how does someone, if they have a sales message account, go about doing this reputation management?
So what needs to happen, we're helping our customers to go through this registration process. So the only thing they need to do is come fill out the form, and we go through the registration process with a single registry, and basically get them a trust score, and that trust score determines, just the same way as the quality score from Google determines the price for the campaigns. A similar process happens here from a trust score perspective. In their particular use case, we're allowing the customers to register with us, and we're doing it on their behalf, and that's trying to make the process as seamless as we possibly can. But that's going on literally right now, and the process is probably going to complete by the end of summer.
Okay. This podcast is brought to you by the Digital Marketing Method monthly group coaching program, your methodology for growing your business and your social media following. Join me and my group of supportive entrepreneurs and learn how you can grow your business and your social media following, where we cover topics such as Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, email marketing, and so much more. Go to dmgroup.online, dmgroup.online. I was not aware of that, but that totally makes sense, because it's the same concept, right? There's a lot of trash going on in the text messaging space as it is in the email space. So I'm sure a lot of spammers are capitalizing on it now, but looks like there's some ways to make
some help in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So of course we have had a lot of changes in the last year across the world, not in any specific industry or country, everywhere. So how has your industry, or how has sales message or text messaging changed in the last year?
Text messaging, there are some industries, if you look at COVID, that spelled doom and gloom for some of the industries related to hospitality and hotels, restaurants, anything that has to do with in-person attendance. But it has been fairly significant. It was fairly painless for some other businesses, and for some others, it actually lifted them up considerably and allowed for them to grow. Some of the industries that experienced a lift from what we see during COVID times are the e-commerce industry, right? So you see a lot of people buying things over the internet as opposed to being in person. Industry that has to do with food delivery. You obviously see the stocks for Amazon and all other companies going up. Anything that has to do with video streaming, because people are spending a lot more time at home. So basically, by necessity, some of those services became a lot more in demand. Same thing happened with SMS. So small businesses are trying to find a better way of communicating because they no longer have a way of communicating with their customers in person. So using a trusted channel is something that's very much preferred from a small business perspective. So we saw a significant growth both for the company and the number of messages that we're handling on a consistent basis.
Yes, absolutely true. It's not just only doom and gloom, right? In our industry, digital marketing, we've seen amazing growth, not just even our own company, but just having spoken to a lot of other digital marketing agencies or anybody in digital marketing, it was like a boom year for a lot of them. So I can imagine it's probably the same thing for what you're experiencing. So that's great. That's good to hear that things are on the up and up for you, because yeah, it totally makes, that's one of the reasons why we've been recommending text messaging to our clients and using sales messages, because for that particular reason, how do we get in touch with our prospective clients or current clients and get the message across? So absolutely, totally makes sense to me, because some industries definitely got the good end of the lollipop, as you will, the sweet end of the lollipop.
They're fared much better than others did.
Yeah. But I guess it's just it's like a correction in the market, right? So there's a correction in the world now, and it just had to shift that way. For better or worse, right? Some were good, some were not so good. So, and how are you using social media for your business? What are you seeing on the social media side?
We're spending a lot of time. We're definitely a little company that could, right? So we have quite a few customers, and we're just spending the time for brand management and also on social media for brand management and community building, right? Because we see that in order for you, meaning for the customer, for the small business to be successful with text messaging, it needs some best practices, right? So It's not only just like with the email. There's a right way of crafting a campaign. There's a right way of engaging with your customers, and there is not an effective way. I wouldn't say a bad way, but there are some ways where they are not as effective. So for us to build a community where our customers can help our other customers and can collaborate, and at the same time for us to be able to communicate those best practices, this is what we're using our social media efforts for, having webinars. We're using it for education purposes and community building purposes.
Yeah, that's a good way to use social media. Yeah. And I think, that's one thing that I've definitely seen a lot of is the community building, like Facebook groups, or just building a community on your page that brings a group of people together, right? So that's a great way of using social media. And then another question I'd like to ask our guests is, someone, of course, who runs a business, you probably use a lot of different tools. What is a tool that is very critical or important in your business that you would recommend?
There's two tools that I feel are absolutely indispensable, and maybe not necessarily these tools, but these types of tools. Within the company, we're using Envision and SurveyMonkey. Well, why is that important? Well, because The tools I consider effectiveness of particular tools. Um, their effectiveness grows as they're becoming more as they're becoming enablers for multiple groups as opposed to a single group, right? So if I'm a group of I'm a particular department using a tool and it's fully encased and then nobody else knows about it. Yes, it's useful for me, but it's not as useful for everybody else. Now, however, some of the tools become really useful for the entire company. They'll either connect people between multiple departments, or they will communicate knowledge. So if you look at SurveyMonkey, and if you look at an Envision, SurveyMonkey is so critical is because it's the voice of our customers. So we're collecting information, we're collecting feedback from our customers on our product roadmap, on our product releases, and everything that we're doing that's customer facing. That information is absolutely invaluable for us to continue aligning and realigning and micro pivoting the business where it needs to be in delivering its product to its customer, delivering our product to the customers. And Envision is so critical is because it communicates then all the ideation process that goes through communication between product and technology is very critical. And typically this is where the breakdown occurs is information from the customers doesn't get to the product people, and product people can relay that information to the customer, to internal team for building it. So I consider those two tools to be essential because they're connectors. They're connectors between multiple groups.
Yeah. So the feedback loop, right? You're creating a feedback loop for the entire business, from the customers to the internal team, back to the customers, back to the internal team. Yeah, that's so important in building any business, right? You want to make sure that what you're building actually is working for the end user and not just, so many times companies are like, engineers will build a bunch of stuff and then the customers are like, why did you do that?
We're absolutely fanatical in making sure that we try to hear the feedback from our customers and incorporate it into our product, because we know that the final measure of success is going to be the efficacy of our products being used by our customers, and if it's not there, then the company is not going to succeed.
Absolutely. And then last question before we wrap up, I always like to ask this one. What is your prediction for the industry? And this is a very open-ended question. It doesn't necessarily have to be your industry, and that could be, but it could be terraforming Mars, AI, it could be living to be 150 years old, anything that's top of mind for you that's in the near future.
Well, what's top of mind for me is just in general, if we're going to abstract ourselves from the industry, then the top of mind for me that our life is going to significantly change within a few years, and it's going to be driven. Sorry for tautology. It's going to be driven by self-driving cars, right? Self-driving cars are significantly going to change the life around us, and why is that? Well, self-driving cars are not going to have as much impact for individuals. They're going to have a lot of impact for the businesses. You're going to have lots of businesses. They're just simply going to disappear, right? So it's the pizza delivery, it's the truck drivers, right? And then it will have a trickle down effect on everything else. So I am predicting that within a couple of years, we're going to have millions of unemployed people who are gainfully employed now, which we need to find work and meaningful work for them, and just that alone is gonna put a strain on everything we see around us, right? And our entire world is going to change. We're not going to own the car anymore. This is going to be a shared service, and if it's a shared service, then there's going to be some specialties around these cars, and advertisement is going to change quite significantly because that's where we're going to spend the time. So that's going to all by itself. Self-driving cars have a way of just basically changing our entire set of workflows and principles that we operate on the day-to-day basis.
I absolutely agree with you about the self-driving cars thing. That is something that I've been thinking a lot about, and I do absolutely think that this is going to be a complete change on how we just go about our day-to-day lives. It's going to be a big impact, some for good, maybe some for not good. But I mean, I always believe in technology moving forward. So I don't, I think that even though it's, again, there's with changes, some people are going to benefit, some people are not, but that's just how it always is, right? Same thing happened with COVID, same thing happens with every revolutionary change. But yes, so many different things are going to be, like insurance is going to be different, right? Advertising, like you said, is going to be different. How we interact with others is going to be different, right? So all of this, yeah, we're not going to probably own cars anymore. We're probably going to, it's going to be like the Uber version of car, of just getting a car. It'll come to you, you'll get in, and then you'll go to its next destination, right? So it's going to be a completely different way on how we interact in the future. I totally think so. Yeah. Awesome. Well, that was great. I love these conversations, especially, the futuristic ones, because it's always interesting to hear where people's minds are. Some stick very close to home. They're like, oh, my industry, what's what I think is going to happen. Some are like, I think we're going to live to be 150 years old. And these are the medical, technology changes that we're going to see. Some talk about self-driving cars. So I love having this open-ended question. So awesome.
No, I do as well.
Yeah. Well, last question is, how can our audiences get in touch with you if they want to learn about you or a sales message?
If somebody wants to get a hold of me, that they can do it through a sales message. It's salesmessage.com, or just email me on my Gmail or Yahoo account. It's ssunduko@yahoo.com or ssunduko@gmail.com. And that's the best way to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Love it. Thanks so much. Great to reconnect. It's been a few years, so good. Always good to hear how everyone is doing in my network. And thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely, Gene. Thank you so much for having me. It was fun.